Say stop the war.
Stop the war.
Say let's get free.
Let's get free.
No steps back. You will dice lo que haces. My people walk away with it. Hands in the air. Start the boom, boom, boom.
Who is it doing the fighting? A well-trained and professional force that's highest collective desire is to go to war. Any war. This force does not fight for Queen and country. It fights when it is told to fight. Even when the generals believe that a certain war is illegal, or unwinnable, or even detrimental to the security of these isles, when it comes to the crunch, they always want war. What does the fighting involve? In my experience, the reality of war is a lot darker. Long periods of waiting, punctuated by unforeseen moments of extreme violence. The reality is raiding people's houses, using explosives to gain entry into their homes, detaining previously unknown males, some as young as 15, and then handing them over to be tortured, leaving their families to fend for themselves, traumatised by your action. The reality is killing people from the safety of an attack helicopter with no regard for the lives of the people who have been dehumanised. Haji, raghead, sand nigger, chogi, argy, paddy, gook, chink, Jap, Kraut, Hun, all terms used by our armed forces. We pretend that we wage war for higher, noble causes. We claim that our armed forces fight for freedom, democracy, or human rights. This is not the case. We wage war according to policy. It is a choice determined by government. This policy is influenced by those who gain from war. Politicians, generals, the arms industry, and the media. These scoundrels always insist that violence is the answer. They ignore the inevitability of unforeseen consequences, the existence of blowback, the fact that it is our own policy that creates our enemy. The reasons they give for starting wars rarely match the reasons that they give for continuing wars, and rarely match the actual outcomes. Their silence in this matter sheds a light on their complicity. Truth is the first casualty of war. I am a human being. My allegiance is not to Queen and country, but to the whole of humanity. I no longer accept the lies that perpetuate war. I no longer accept that violence can lead to peace. Never again will I be complicit in the killing and torture of my brothers and sisters. Never again will I accept the vile religion of patriotism. I refuse to pull on that rancid uniform, and I refuse to fight for Queen and country.
I'm sorry. I don't want to be an emperor. That's not my business. I don't want to rule or conquer anyone. I should like to help everyone if possible. Jew, Gentile, black man, white. We all want to help one another. Human beings are like that. We want to live by each other's happiness, not by each other's misery. We don't want to hate and despise one another. In this world there's room for everyone, and the good earth is rich and can provide for everyone. The way of life can be free and beautiful, but we have lost the way. Greed has poisoned men's souls, has barricaded the world with hate, has goose-stepped us into misery and bloodshed. We have developed speed, but we have shut ourselves in. Machinery that gives abundance has left us in want. Our knowledge has made us cynical, our cleverness hard and unkind. We think too much and feel too little. More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness and gentleness. Without these qualities, life will be violent, and all will be lost. The aeroplane and the radio have brought us closer together. The very nature of these inventions cries out for the goodness in men, cries out for universal brotherhood, for the unity of us all. Even now my voice is reaching millions throughout the world, millions of despairing men, women, and little children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people. To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish. Soldiers, don't give yourselves to brutes, men who despise you, enslave you, who regiment your lives, tell you what to do, what to think, and what to feel, who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle, use you as cannon fodder. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines. You are not cattle. You are men. You have the love of humanity in your hearts. You don't hate. Only the unloved hate. The unloved and the unnatural. Soldiers, don't fight for slavery. Fight for liberty. In the 17th chapter of St. Luke it is written, the kingdom of God is within man, not one man nor a group of men, but in all men, in you. You, the people, have the power to create machines, the power to create happiness. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure. Then in the name of democracy, let us use that power. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world, a decent world, that will give men a chance to work, that will give youth a future and old age a security. By the promise of these things, brutes have risen to power, but they lie. They do not fulfill that promise. They never will. Dictators free themselves, but they enslave the people. Now let us fight to fulfill that promise. Let us fight to free the world, to do away with national barriers, to do away with greed, with hate and intolerance. Let us fight for a world of reason, a world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Soldiers, in the name of democracy, let us all unite!
So I want to thank you for coming this evening. My name is Michael McPherson. I've been associated with Veterans for Peace since 2002. I was executive director from 2005 to 2010, and now I'm also come back to be interim executive director. I am very honored to be on this stage today to participate in this program. I'm here for one reason, to honor the Vietnam veterans and your experience, the ones that are here. I'm here to honor David Klein, a Vietnam veteran who, yes. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't even, maybe not even be in Veterans for Peace and would not have known about Veterans for Peace. And he was the first veteran for peace that I knew, and he is my role model in trying to be a veteran for peace. And I'm here most of all because we want to make sure we're kicking off a campaign, a full disclosure campaign, to make sure that the truth about the Vietnam War is told. The war, America's war in Vietnam, because we know that as the 50-year anniversary and the different events that will take place throughout the years, the truth will not be told by the people who are doing these events. So we have to make sure that the truth is told. So I want to commend the organizers and the organizations that are participating and putting on this event and will continue on with this campaign. I also remember sitting in front of the TV when prisoners came home, watching that. I was real close to the TV watching that happen. And I have this picture in my mind of one coming off the plane and kissing the ground, and me just feeling, you know, concerned for the person. But I must tell you that, and I say this because I'm telling you this story because there's all sides to war. There's what the soldier goes through, the airman, the seaman, the Marine, and there's what happens at home. And my mother's a very independent woman. She married 3 men. The third person she married was a Vietnam veteran. And I lived on Fort Bragg for a period of time. At the time, I had no idea about post-traumatic stress, but I lived the experience of a vet who had, well, he was still in the military, post-traumatic stress, arguments in my family, drinking, drugs, hearing his parents, his mother talk about how he went to Vietnam, came back a different person. You know, these are things that now that I'm older, I understand, and seen some of it in my son who served a tour in Iraq, and seen it in many of my friends and some of the people here. I've seen some of those things and seen it in David Klein. This is the story that we need to make sure is told. That's the story that they will not tell. They will not tell the story that happens to the families when the soldiers come back. The stress and the strain and the destruction here at home. They won't tell the story of the deaths, the killings that took place in Vietnam. They'll just try to make it grand and good, and we're not going to allow that to happen. Okay, so I have a co-host here today that I'm extremely honored to be on the stage with, Susan.
Thank you. Thanks, Michael. My name is Susan Schnall. I was in the United States Navy during the Vietnam conflict. And we've spoken a bit, Michael and myself, about how the program will run. So bear with me, folks. Those of you who know me know I always have to do something prepared. And I've done it again today. Today, at our event, which is called Full Disclosure Toward an Honest Commemoration of the American War in Vietnam, we celebrate the victory of the People's Army of Vietnam and the National Liberation Front of South Vietnam, which took place on April 30th, 1975. It is called Reunification Day in Vietnam, and I think it's important for us to remember that, Reunification Day. This afternoon, you will hear a true rendering of history from those of us who were there in the belly of the beast, in the United States military, on the front lines at demonstrations marching against the American war in Vietnam. We are witness to the lies our government perpetrated on the people of this country. We knew the government was lying to us when they created the Gulf of Tonkin myth in 1964, justifying the United States invasion of the country of Vietnam. We protested the increase of US troops involvement in 1961, in 1962, in 1963, and then on August 4th, 1964, we knew that President Johnson and the National Security Agency were lying when they claimed that the USS Maddox was attacked by North Vietnamese motor torpedo boats in international waters that are called the Gulf of Tonkin because it is a body of water off the coast of the northern part of Vietnam. How do you believe a government that lies to you through consecutive presidential administrations about its actions and involvement in the war in Vietnam when you've been there, in the streets and in Vietnam, and have seen the truth of the body counts, of the use of the most modern, terrifying, and destructive weapons, when you've heard firsthand accounts of those who went and served, who came back angry and disillusioned about the conflict, when you've been witness to the horror of this war in television night after night. The United States dropped 7.8 million tons of munitions on the country of Vietnam. more than was used in World War II on Germany and Japan. 800,000 tons failed to detonate, contaminating 20% of the land of Vietnam, and people continue to suffer the wounds of that war and that contamination today. From 1961 through 1975, the United States sprayed 77 million liters of herbicides over South and Central Vietnam, containing more than 360 kilograms of dioxin, and they sprayed this multiple times. During the conflict, there were over 9 million United States military personnel on active duty. Over 3.5 million served in Southeast Asia and Vietnam. In Vietnam, over 3.8 million civilians were killed. 3.8 million civilians. 1.1 million military personnel were killed. I once asked a Vietnamese friend when I was visiting Vietnam about his perception of the conflict, if he knew during those years that the Vietnamese would win. And he said to me, "This is our country. Where would we go? You Americans could return to the United States, but where would we go?" It has been 39 years since the reunification of Vietnam. This summer marks 50 years since the lies about the Gulf of Tonkin. And it is 100 years since ordinary soldiers stopped shooting along the Western Front in Europe and celebrated a Christmas truce in the middle of World War I. And yet, the government of the United States continues its march of death and destruction. We invaded the country of Iraq in 2003 because our government told us we needed to take care of the weapons of mass destruction. Do you all remember that? We needed to end Saddam Hussein's support for terrorism, and we needed to free the Iraqi people. Today, at a financial cost of over $815 billion, the deaths of over 5,000 American soldiers, with thousands suffering from physical, psychological, and moral injuries, and over 500,000 Iraqi deaths. A health crisis from the continued use of chemical and incendiary weapons. The government has created in our name another humanitarian and political disaster. We know that these wars are a front for the United States war-based economy, for the greed of the multinational corporations, to feed millions of dollars to Wall Street, while we have children in this United States who go to bed hungry. We know that millions of low-paid workers can't get an increase in minimum wage because the profits that go to the 1% are so important. We must continue to stand up and be heard, to say no to greed and immorality, no to war and conflict, and yes to peace, yes to our children's future, and yes to the redistribution and equality of the wealth of this nation. It is up to us to claim those rights that we deserve, those rights we marched for, those rights we worked for, and those rights we fought for. And we will succeed. Thank you.
Okay, The next person we're going to have a welcome from Gary A. Bird, community minister here from Judson Memorial Church, author, Keys to the Kingdom, the year 2012, Countdown to the Apocalypse.
It is such a pleasure to see all of you here today. I want to welcome each and every one of you on behalf of Reverend Donna Shaper, who is the senior pastor here at Judson Memorial, and its staff. We welcome you all. We are glad of the activity and the honoring and also the commemoration to those who have fought in wars. Myself personally, when I got this assignment, I really didn't know this group at all, Veterans for Peace. So I'm so happy and so glad that we're coming together on this day to bring forth the message of peace versus war. And as Dr. King once said, truth crushed the earth will rise, no lie can live forever. And so therefore, I congratulate you all, we welcome you here, and we hope to see you here again. Amen.
Our next speaker is Bishop George Packard, retired bishop for armed services and federal ministries. He served in Vietnam in 1969, received 2 Bronze Stars and a Silver Star, and recently was arrested with the Occupy Wall Street and Veterans for Peace at the Viet Nam Memorial in New York City. Bishop Packard.
I just got off a plane, so thank you for bearing with me. And I've got a bum knee, but also I have to sit down because I get panic attacks thanks to my happy experience in Vietnam, still to this day. And I've shared that with my support group in the VA. And I guess that's really why I particularly want to be here, panic attacks or not, or sense of worry about talking to you or not. The U.S. Ronald Reagan, as it was off the coast of Korea, had to go to respond to an alert call off of Fukushima after the tsunami. And what happened was they steamed, full head of steam to that location. Little did they know that they were steaming through some very toxic water. And I say all of this, and I retrieve this memory with you, because I think of you as friends, regardless of how uneasy and nervous I am to speak about this, because I look to the United States Army as one of the places that really was nice to me. I liked being in the Army. I could count on it. It was a crappy existence, but I liked being I liked when I was in Vietnam, and if I asked for supplies, they delivered supplies. It was a fair organization. Nobody told me that, like the surgeon's warning on the side of a pack of cigarettes, that you needed to be careful about participating for the long-range effect of your health. Little would I know at 70 years old, I'd be sitting here with you folks talking about Agent Orange and the gift that keeps on giving, diabetes and cancer and all these other things that seem to persist in just going as a young 26-year-old second lieutenant butter bar going to Vietnam, thinking I was doing the right thing, standing up for my country. So back to the USS Ronald Reagan, steaming to give assistance and succor to that awful embattled environment on the east coast of Japan. Fukushima was just blowing up, and as I mentioned earlier, the USS Ronald Reagan was steaming through these really wastewaters. And this is what happens in institutions. they protect their own existence. First, make no mistake about it, first and foremost. Now, this is the United States Navy now, and as the Reagan is steaming for up, so it can be on post, on position, it moves through these waste waters and not knowing that it's doing so. And then in the first week after it is on station, they realize that they may be in a contaminated area. And so that the 5,000 sailors aren't distraught and nervous and panicky and going crazy, they tell everybody, well, maybe you should, everybody, just as a preventative measure, we'll all take a shower. Everybody takes showers. You know how that can be. Hurry up and get in line and participate. And then 3 days later after that, they revise that and they require everyone to take iodine pills. And then 3 days after that, they make another assessment. It's a week and a half later that the Pentagon finally admits, the Chief of Naval Operations finally admits that some danger has been detected. This is the kind of thing that gives me worry about the commitments that we place ourselves in throughout the world. I don't think serving your country should be an endangerment to your long-term health. And that's the kind of stuff that we're about. I'm not feeling sorry for myself. I'm lived a long life, but it's not going to be as long as it could be because I served in Viet Nam. I'm pretty sure of that. And I think that that's the kind of thing that makes you move you to the edge of being more, not just interested, but being angry. As a veteran said to me in Chicago just this morning, he said, I'm not angry, I'm pissed off because I want to know what the real story is. Why in my young life was I committed to doing this? He's standing in front of me, he has a C-leg, a computer-assisted leg below the knee, and he's saying, I would like to know why this happened to me. He said, I don't feel like, oh, woe is me and that sort of stuff. He was, he's a family man. He's getting on with his life. He's a strapping kid, and his wife's expecting. So it's not that side of it. It's not like, oh, of all the people, why did it happen to me? The question is, why is our foreign policy so removed from reality that it commits us to these kinds of events and places without thinking? And then when they happen, and here's the point about the Ronald Reagan, and then when they happen, we're not transparent enough, we're not conscientious enough to ever take responsibility and accountability. See, that's why I find myself turning out to support Tretkov and other Veterans for Peace whenever they send out the call, because I'd like to know why these things happened. I think we deserve those kinds of answers if they're asking for that kind of commitment. Don't you agree?
I think we would all agree with Bishop Packard that it is time to end the death and destruction of the United States foreign policy, and this year, this 50th anniversary of the Gulf of Tonkin, the 100th anniversary of the Christmas truce, is really time for us to say, we want peace, we want no more war. Our next presenters are Professor Louis and Fast Eddie, street poets. So it's wonderful to have you guys here, and thank you, and please, a round of welcome for them.
War is nasty, ugly, and cold. It kills the body and rots the soul. For silver and gold, an old story is told. It's your life that's bought and sold. You thought a job in the Army would teach you a skill, but the Army's job is teach you to kill. You kill some guy you don't even know, a dude like you, a regular Joe with not too much dough, and he might kill you all the same. Lose your legs, or lose your brain, and for a little more, that's hard to ignore. And check out the guys who fought the war. They had pride in our side, and they fought with heart. Now they're out on your block with a shopping cart. They fought with what they thought was hope, and now they're down on the corner, strung out on dope. And does it matter to them when it's said and done if the war was lost or won? And do you really care, false or true, which oil company sells gas to you, and along with the pain, and who's to blame? It's a sure enough shame, but war could drive a whole country insane. Wave the flag and believe in lies, everyone gets crazy, it's no big surprise. We look around us, we could find the whole country could lose its mind and say we believe in a better world for every little boy and girl, and say we believe in a cleaner earth, clean air and water. We know what it's worth, but when it comes to the world, if you really ask, war is the worst thing that can come to pass. It destroys everything in its path, burns through the earth like the grapes of wrath, and who gets to pay for all the waste, death and destruction all over the place? It's not too funny, it's low and crummy, but war is paid for with our money. Planes, guns, bullets too, Army tanks, trucks, Army shoes, aircraft carriers on the ocean blue, the whole thing paid by you. Tons and tons of money, all thrown away, gone from your check every payday. And who sold the bullets? Who sold the plane? They got a face and they got a name. Boeing, Halliburton, and Lockheed, Bechtel, Grumman, IT&T, billion-dollar companies want billions more. Getting down to it, they don't mind war. Trillions of dollars up in smoke. Someone's making money while you go broke. Marching everywhere, flags unfurl, so multinational companies can rule the world. And you kill somebody your same age, come home and they pay the minimum wage. No matter the war is won or lost, who made the profit, who paid the cost? No matter the war is lost or won, the flag don't wave for everyone. It waves for a new corporate foreign factory. It waves for your brother in the cemetery. And you kill somebody you never met to try and get something you will never get. And we might not want feelings or even dealings with people who kill. It's awful and ill, but say what you will, being a killer is a bitter pill. There's a ragged, broke veteran all out on the street, his shoes all torn up, you can see his feet. He fought the war, but the war wasn't kind. He is out of the war and out of his mind. So I don't want to listen when the trumpets blow. I don't believe what I hear on the radio. I listen for the voice of those who are gone. I listen for the voice of the baby and mom. And if you care about your family and your home, if you care about the children not even grown, if you want your money to stay and not ever roam, if you want the beer and not the foam, if you want to buy your kid an ice cream cone, if you want a little help with your student loan, if you want to lift everyone to a higher zone, if you check out the facts with a fine-tooth comb, if murder is murder, even with a drone, if you could hear the dead and the dying moan, then it's true from here to eternity, from the clear blue sky to the deep blue sea. Killing other people will not make them free, and war is not the best thing for you and me, 'cause war is nasty, ugly and cold. It kills the body and rots the soul. For silver and gold, an old story is told. It's our lives that are bought and sold.
Our next speaker is Camillo McPherson, who served It's weird for me to use the word served, but he was in the military in Vietnam. He has been an extraordinary activist, fighting for peace and justice, and talking about the morality of what happens when people have to deal with armed conflict and war. It's a pleasure for me to introduce McPherson.
Everyone's saying how much they're happy to be here. I have to say, I'm not happy to be here. We've been doing this for 50 years. I always thought that by now we wouldn't have to do this anymore. It's just sad that we still have to come here, get together, and when we get together, we're not getting together to socialize or enjoy each other's company. We're getting together to discuss the American invasion and occupation of Vietnam. We're going to discuss it not as history, the way historians and scholars may meet to discuss World War II as Civil War, but as truth tellers with a sense of urgency motivated by an uneasiness, an internal unrest, and outrage that we, the veterans, are again being exploited and America is again being lied to. It is clear, or at least it should be, that the purpose of this congressionally mandated 13-year commemoration of the Vietnam War is not to recognize or to demonstrate appreciation for our sacrifices, however misguided they may have been, nor is it motivated by a concern for our well-being or a regret for having victimized both the Americans and the Vietnamese who suffered and continue to suffer as a result of their war. Rather, this commemoration is in reality to celebrate a crime, a criminal act of aggression against the Vietnamese people, America's crime, my crime. It is in reality to continue to perpetuate the mythology that the war was necessary and just and moral, and we who fought there and bled there and killed there and died there were liberators and saviors, freeing the Vietnamese people from communist domination, heroes defending America's freedom. It is, in reality, to celebrate militarism, hoping to convince the next generation that war is noble and those who fight it heroic, and to entice them to become the instruments of slaughter and cannon fodder in the corporatocracy's perpetual wars for hegemony and for profit. So as a result, after some 50 years, we must meet again, not to socialize and enjoy each other's company, but because those of us who know the truth about war have a moral obligation to God, to our nation, to the Vietnamese people, and to all the people of the world to dispel the myth and to tell the truth. We must meet like this because we have a moral obligation to our comrades, other veterans who may be misled by the pain, the guilt, the shame for what they did and what they were part of. Comrades who fear that the truth would make the plight of living with the experiences of war even more tragic and unbearable. So they seek comfort in the mythology of nobility and heroism. We are obligated to help them to understand that truth is not degrading, nor is it demeaning. Rather, it is necessary if we are ever to come home from war, if we are ever to put the war behind us and find peace, we must embrace and accept the truth. We must help them to understand that there is no healing from illusion and there's no reconciliation from mythology. And finally, we must have full disclosure. We must shed light upon the mythologizing of war and the old lie, dulce et decorum est, pro patria more, so our young people won't be misled by the shallow claims of patriotism and duty as we were misled. This is why we are here today. So let this truth be our legacy. Let peace be our goal.
I know we all are aware of the horrors of war, and as Kevin Augustine, our soldier, sits here and tries to heal those wounds, I'd like us to think about that, to think about the victims and the survivors of war, and what it is we can do, what we need to do, what we will do to heal those wounds of war, as he heals the wounds of an image of a former enemy. And we need to move forward to heal those wounds between those who we perceived years and years ago might have been our enemy. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Jeff Cohn. I'm sorry I took this a little bit out of order. Jeff is director, the Park Center for Independent Media at Ithaca College, and the founder of Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. And I'll just remind you that he did write a book about cable news, My Misadventure in the Cable Media. Jeff.
Thank you. It's clear today that the U.S. anti-war movement during Vietnam, and especially the Vietnam veterans against the war, scared the hell out of the war-making elites. In the late 1970s, there was a huge fear in elite circles that a broad public sentiment had taken hold, a consensus, that the government was quick to send people off to war in large numbers, quick to start wars, quick to forget about the vets as they're returning from those wars. And that was not just left-wing sentiment. That was broad sentiment, even though it was sparked by anti-war organizations and alternative media. But the sentiment scared the hell out of the elites, and they worried about what they called Vietnam syndrome, or Vietnam paralysis, that might interfere with future military adventures. And the pundits in the mainstream media worried, especially this new group that was called the neoconservatives, the neocon intellectuals, who were at that time trying to put Ronald Reagan in the White House. Now, neocons are always cheerleaders for war, and like most cheerleaders, they can always be found, and their loved ones, on the sidelines and not on the field of battle. And the effort to rehabilitate the Vietnam War and defeat Vietnam syndrome began in earnest in 1980, when then candidate Ronald Reagan went to the Veterans of Foreign Wars Convention in Chicago, and he cut against this consensus by declaring that the U.S. war in Vietnam had been a, quote, noble cause. And a decade later, at the end of the Gulf War, President Bush I was boasting, by God, we've kicked Vietnam syndrome once and for all. So that's 15 years after the U.S. exit from Saigon, but the fear of Vietnam syndrome was still on the minds of U.S. leaders. And the attempt to rehabilitate the Vietnam War continues today with Obama's 50th commemoration and the platitudes from Obama, and the claim from Obama that the U.S. military was fighting in Vietnam, and I'm quoting, to protect the ideas we hold, to protect the ideals we hold dear as Americans. Today we see Obama waging a war against whistleblowers who leak documents about war crimes, about torture, about spying, and it's easy to understand why. Because in order for leaders to get away with the ludicrous comments Ronald Reagan made in 1980 about Vietnam, or Obama's been making recently about Vietnam, or the absurd claims we're hearing about the wars that are going on today. It's important that the public not have access to the official record. They want the public to live in this fantasy land where we don't have access to any of these internal documents like the ones that Daniel Ellsberg leaked, the Pentagon Papers. Daniel Ellsberg was just one of many heroic Vietnam-era whistleblowers. I look at the Vietnam Veterans Against the War as a group of whistleblowers. They were internal to a government misconduct, government policy that was abusive, and they talked about it. Now, Obama's comments about Vietnam only make sense if we don't have access to the Pentagon Papers, because if we do have access to the Pentagon Papers, American ideals can only mean killing innocent civilians, lying to the US public, preventing elections. I want to use my few minutes to talk about and confront a crucial myth that's still believed today, and it's the myth that there was a truly independent, aggressive mainstream media that turned the public against the war. The reality is exactly the opposite. It was the anti-war activities of brave Americans, whether it was students, returning Vietnam vets, Black and Latino organizations, Martin Luther King, Muhammad Ali, Dr. Benjamin Spock. It was these Americans, it was the public that opened up the media and turned the public against the war in spite of the media, which had been pro-war from the early 1960s to late 1968, 69, and in some outlets even beyond. Far from the nonsense about Vietnam being the first uncensored war or the first televised war, the mainstream media up through 1969 were almost exclusively censorial, with very few exceptions. They were repeatedly given evidence of US war crimes, and they suppressed that evidence. When you hear the myth makers talk about their imagined independent mainstream media that turned the public against the war, Exhibit A is always the My Lai massacre. Now, it's pretty hard to ignore the massacre of hundreds of civilians in a single village, but that's what the mainstream media did for almost a year, for more than a year and a half. When did the My Lai massacre happen? March of 1968. And immediately, Ron Ridenour, the Vietnam veteran and the heroic whistleblower, was taking evidence of the My Lai massacre to one US mainstream media outlet after another. And at every single one, they turned him away. They would not touch the story. It wasn't until November 1969, 20 months after the massacre happened, that the story finally came out. And how did it come out? It was Seymour Hersh in an alternative small news outlet called Dispatch News Service, and was released to coincide with the massive moratorium march on Washington. So you had anti-war upsurge was responsible for this story getting out after the mainstream media had suppressed it for so long and kept it under wraps. Go back to the Tet Offensive of January, February 1968. By this point, millions of Americans who'd educated themselves through campus teach-ins, rallies, the returning vets, they were calling for withdrawal of troops from Vietnam. February 1968, the Boston Globe did a survey of the 39 leading dailies in the United States. They could not find one daily that was editorializing in support of withdrawal of US troops from Vietnam. It was active citizens that changed public consciousness in spite of the mainstream media. When Martin Luther King broke his silence and he went uptown to the Riverside Church in April of 1967, and he made his speech against Vietnam, against foreign policy, and he declared that the United States was the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. He was savaged by the mainstream media. He was savaged by the New York Times. Life magazine called his speech demagogic slander that sounded like a script from Radio Hanoi. The Washington Post patronized King has diminished his usefulness to his cause, to his country, to his people. And think about the original lie that we've heard already. The Gulf of Tonkin hoax of August 1964, the claim that not one, but there was two unprovoked attacks by North Vietnamese PT boats on US destroyers. This was almost as transparently a lie as all of the lies 40 years later that drove us into the Iraq invasion. The skeptical independent journalist I.F. Stone was poking holes in that lie the week that the story came out. But the blaring headlines in the mainstream media, whether it was the big newspapers or the nightly network news, this is what the Washington Post said. Headline, American planes hit North Vietnam after second attack on our destroyers. Move taken to halt new aggression. Decades after Tonkin, my writing partner Norman Solomon went to these mainstream media to see if anyone had retracted it. He could find not a single retraction of this inaccurate and lethal coverage, but he did find Murray Martyr, the Washington Post retiree who had written most of the inaccurate coverage for the front pages of the Washington Post. And he asked Murray Martyr about it, and Murray said, quote, I can assure you there was never any retraction. If you were making a retraction, you'd have to retract virtually everyone's entire coverage of the Vietnam War. And then Murray Martyr said, if the American press had been doing its job and the Congress had been doing its job, we would never have been involved in the Vietnam War. This is from a guy whose credulous page one journalism in one of the most influential dailies helped expand the Vietnam War. I want to finish with two quick anecdotes, personal ones. In 1960, pardon me? Hugh Thompson? Yeah. Yeah. In 1965 and 1966, I was 14, 15 years old, and I was unusual. I was a news nerd. I watched the nightly news every night. I read Time magazine every week. I prided myself on being a kid who really knew what was happening in the world. And based on everything I knew from the mainstream media, I was a gung-ho Vietnam War hawk. I wrote a paper in the 10th grade for social studies attacking the football star Joe Namath, whose bad knee kept him out of Vietnam. And my exact words were, Namath is healthy enough to play one of the roughest sports on earth, but not to defend his country in Vietnam. Where did I get such a whacked out idea that flying to the other side of the globe to attack a peasant society that had no animus to us and could not hurt us if it did have animus toward us, that somehow that was defending our country? I got that nutty idea, as did millions of other Americans from the mainstream media, as did kids that were just a few years older than me that were going off to Vietnam. That was the 10th grade. I had never heard of I.F. Stone's Weekly. I had never heard of Ramparts magazine or the alternative press. Luckily for me, before I graduated from high school, I found these alternative publications, and they turned my world and my worldview upside down. If you wonder why I'm so fanatical about independent media, and that's my job at Ithaca College in the journalism department, it's because independent media changed my life and perhaps saved my life. So in early 1971, I'm in Detroit, where I grew up, and the Vietnam Veterans Against the War are having the Winter Soldier hearings. And by then, I'm vehemently against the war. I'm 19 years old. I was doing the little I could to help. And one Vietnam veteran after another is getting up on stage as the most moving speakers I've ever heard in my life, pouring their hearts out about the horrors they'd experienced, the atrocities against Vietnamese civilians that they'd seen or participated in. Some of them talked about how the mainstream media had deceived them in going over in the first place. And I was sitting there thinking, if this testimony could get out to the public, this war that's dragging on year after year after year, it would end tomorrow. But the mainstream media weren't there. And there was one rare mainstream media camera crew that showed up ever so briefly. They were there, I think, for less than 20 minutes. And in those days, you didn't have a little camera You know, those days you had huge camera, tripod, sound equipment, you had lights, and they start, after being there just a few minutes, they start collapsing all of their equipment, putting it away in boxes, and a room full of Vietnam veterans watches, and their friends and loved ones, watches as the one mainstream media crew walks out of the room, and the veterans and the people there start jeering and booing the mainstream media. That was the moment I became a media critic for life. And I think there's two lessons that I'm taking away from the Vietnam War experience. One, we need to build independent media. The good news is independent media have more reach, more power, more professionalism today by far than they ever did during the height of the Vietnam War. And that's largely because of the internet, and the internet needs to be saved from corporate predators. And the second lesson I learned is we have to support groups like Veterans for Peace and Iraq Veterans Against the War, because without these groups, the anti-war movement is rootless. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I think we're hearing over and over why it's important that we have launched this campaign. And I've had some people ask me, why are you doing this campaign? You should be doing this. Everybody's always got ideas about what you should be doing, you know. You should be doing that. You shouldn't be fighting the war that happened 50 years ago. And what they don't understand is what we're talking about today affects what happens right now. That if you don't know what happened in the past, it will be repeated. And they certainly are trying to use Vietnam, and will use Vietnam, to make it okay to do the same thing again. And fortunately for me, my mother's a teacher. She was a teacher. She's retired. And she made sure that we knew what was going on all the time. A lot of parents don't do that. A lot of parents don't know themselves. So that's where we have to fill in. That's the job that we have to do, to make sure that this story is told. So our next speaker, I spoke so long that my phone went off. Deborah Spreet is the director of World Can't Wait, initiated in 2005 to drive out the Bush regime by repudiating this program, forcing it from office through a mass independent movement. Based in New York City, she leads World Can't Wait in its continuing effort to stop the crimes of our government. She has worked with this, I didn't know this, so I like this. This is the reason I'm reading this. She worked with abortion providers for 25 years, organizing community support and helping them withstand anti-abortion violence. And this is really great. Since the age of 19, when she confronted Richard Nixon during a face-to-face meeting and told him to stop the war in Vietnam, she has been a leader in the opposition to U.S. wars and invasions. Deborah says, stop thinking like an American and start thinking about humanity. Deborah Spreet.
So I came to talk, I was delighted to be invited by Tarek to come and talk about the time I met Richard Nixon. I've never done that in New York before. This picture went all over the world. You can imagine. Think a little bit about this timeline. This happened December 3rd of 1970. Jeff was talking about what happened in 68 and 70. It was really helpful, although I'd take a little bit issue with one point in what you said, Jeff. I would like to attribute the growth of the anti-war movement mostly to factors outside of this country, outside of America. There was a revolution going on all over the world. It was in 1968 when I got my first copy of Quotations from Chairman Mao. All right? I was on the bus from Milwaukee to Madison, where I was going to high school, not that far away from Jeff. I was a year ahead of him. And the Black Panther Party on the bus said to me, "You need to read this book." And that was what was happening all over the world. People were throwing off convention and thinking about what we were going to do to really change the world. We needed a revolution. We did not get it, and that has a lot to do with the situation we're in right now. But back to December 3rd, 1970, I was a high school activist. I attribute that to having grown up in Madison, which was one of the key centers of the anti-war movement. And in high school, when we had
the windows open in the spring, tear gas would come in because we were pretty close to the campus. I was trained by the Dow chemical riots, 1967. I was trained by the Black Panthers and SDS and SNCC and the Freedom Riders. All of those people were in Madison at that time. They introduced me to leaders, and I met Miss Fannie Lou Hamer from Mississippi, who became a family friend, and she would come and stay in my parents' house when I was in high school. She taught me a lot, and I ended up doing a project to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars for the Freedom Farm Co-op to buy land in Mississippi. And for some odd reason, I got an award from the governor of Wisconsin about it, and I was like, okay. Then I went on off to college, became even more of a student radical, was actually leading demonstrations against the war, against all kinds of outrageous, illegitimate behavior. And 1 month after the students were killed at Kent State, May 4th, 1970, I get a letter from the Department of Justice, which I thought was a joke, saying, Richard Nixon wants to give you an award called the Young American Medal for Service. You know, so I was like, hell no. You know, what a friggin' sellout I would be if I took that award. But things developed. The award ceremony kept getting postponed month by month because Nixon was not talking to the media after the invasion of Cambodia and what happened at Kent State. He refused to have any press conferences. So 6 months later, December of 1970, the call finally comes. They're flying my whole family to Washington to get this award from Nixon. And I'm like, what the hell am I going to do? Do I sell out by taking it? And, you know, a lot of my friends were saying, you know, I think you should go. Something might come out of it. Okay. So we go. We get in the limousine. We're driven underground into the Department of Justice. We come up on an elevator right into the office of John Mitchell. And people are laughing. This was the Attorney General under Nixon who took a fall for Watergate a couple years later. This was in 1970. We're in the room, you know, they're making small talk, and in walks, I swear to God, J. Edgar Hoover. This is 1970. He's barely coherent. He totters in. Anyway, we all go to the White House. I get the award. I'm the last of the youth to get it. And I'm still thinking, what the hell am I going to do here? Am I going to sell out, or am I going to speak up? Nixon does it all for me because he gives a speech about, these are the good youth. They're not the ones out there protesting. And I'm like, uh-oh, hell no. Now, you've really got me upset. And he went on and on. And the more he talked, I'm like, okay, this can't go down like this. Here I have been in the office with J. Edgar Hoover, and I'm thinking to myself, it was 1 year ago today that Fred Hampton and Mark Clark were killed by COINTELPRO, by the FBI drugging and killing them in their apartment in Chicago. And I, as a college student, had actually gone through that apartment because the Panther Party opened it up to the public. We walked through it. And I'm thinking about all this as I'm in the room with Nixon and whatever his name was, Hoover. So Nixon comes around to me and he, you know, gives me my medal, which I do still have today. It's gold. And he says, oh, my dear, that was very good. And I just said to him, you know, I can't believe you're all that sincere in giving this award for humanity when you're responsible for killing hundreds of thousands of people in Vietnam. But I wasn't mic'd. And Nobody knew what happened. This is an important part of the story, the whole White House press corps was there. Because, why? To hear me? No. Because Nixon hadn't talked to the press for 6 months. They heard the word Vietnam, and they also saw Nixon completely turn white. And he says to me, we're doing the best we can. And he turns on his heel, he looks at his watch, and he says, I have an appointment. And he leaves the whole ceremony. So they knew something was up. And what do I draw from this? I was chagrined for many years. I couldn't talk about it. Because I said to myself, why the hell did I actually accept the award? I should have done something even more dramatic. But then I came to understand, as it was the #1 news story that day around the world, because some little college dropout had gotten inside the Blue Room and told Nixon to end the war. And it was a symbol of what was pervading from around the world into this country, developing a sensibility among us that I refuse to give up about the illegitimacy of these wars that this government unleashes on the rest of the world, and the need to know that American lives are not more important than other people's lives. This is really, really important. And I would say to everyone, you never know, on the one hand, what could develop if you open your mouth, if you challenge people, if you think about what the terms are and try to change them. I don't accept the fact that people in this country are asleep and are largely going along with things. It's not in our interest to do that. We do have to make a change. We need a revolution. We need a whole different society, and it is possible to wake people up. The other thing I take from it, and I'll leave you with this, is if a college dropout at 19 years old, wearing a hippie skirt and combat boots, can shake things up, if another college dropout who's 29 years old, just about a year ago, can leak secrets that rock the whole national security setup back on its feet, then this system is really vulnerable. It is no damn good. It is the biggest purveyor of violence in the world right now, and it is vulnerable. The ingredient needed is us. The ingredient needed is us. You can see the scrapbook if you want. It's back on the World Can't Wait table. People are waving where it is. And I'd love to talk to people more about what we can do from here on out. And thank you for coming tonight.
All right, moving along. Our next speaker is Howard Machtinger. I think I did that right. He is a former director of Carolina Teaching Fellows, a student teacher scholarship program at the University of North Carolina. He is an education and civil rights activist, a teacher, a forum leader, and a political commentator. Machtinger, is that right? Did I say it right? Okay, is a former member of Students for a Democratic Society and Weathermen. And I just met Howie in the last probably 6 months or so. And I'm really excited. He's a major organizer of the Full Disclosure campaign. And thank you for being here, Howie.
Thank you. I am honored to be speaking here tonight. Before I start my talk, I want to point out one thing that's not on the program, which is we have a website for this campaign. It's www.vietnamfulldisclosure.org, and there's a lot of stuff on it, including events that have happened and events that are coming. So I'd like people to look at that and contribute to it, because there's ways to contribute to it. So I want to put our campaign here in some Historical context. At the height of Jim Crow, on July 4th, 1913, President Woodrow Wilson spoke at the 50th anniversary Blue-Gray reunion at the Battle of Gettysburg. Somehow, he managed to omit the issue of slavery and eliminate African Americans from his evocation of the Civil War. He strained to look forward as he spoke to a crowd of white veterans of the Union and Confederate armies. Quote, "We have found one another again as brothers and comrades in arms, enemies no longer, generous friends rather, our battles long past, the quarrel forgotten, except that we will not forget the splendid valor, the manly devotion." The theme of that reunion from its earliest conception in 1909 was national harmony and patriotism, not the abolition of slavery or the problematics of racism. On May 25, 2012, in announcing a 13-year-long commemoration of the war in Vietnam, funded by Congress at $65 million, President Barack Obama proclaimed in similar tones, and I quote, "As we observe the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam War, we reflect with solemn reverence upon the valor of a generation that served with honor. We pay tribute to the more than 3 million servicemen and women who left their families to serve bravely a world away from everything they knew and everything they loved. From Nha Trang to Khe Sanh, from Hue to Saigon, and countless villages in between, they pushed through jungles and rice paddies, heat and monsoon, fighting heroically to protect the ideals we hold dear as Americans. Through more than a decade of combat over air, land, and sea, these proud Americans upheld the highest traditions of our armed forces." Obama's theme was the heroism of Americans, avoiding the issue of imperial aggression and eliminating the reality of Vietnamese suffering and the actual experience of soldiers and veterans in that war, a war in which over 2 million civilian Vietnamese were killed. Woodrow Wilson's speech signaled the consolidation of Jim Crow at the highest level. He was calling for the reconciliation between the North and the South on the basis of a shared white supremacy. It was an attempt to erase a liberationist narrative of the Civil War articulated by the likes of Frederick Douglass. This was accompanied in academic circles by the rise of the Dunning School of historians, which demonized the efforts of the freed people after the Civil War and during Reconstruction while justifying the Jim Crow system. The Dunning School dominated historical interpretations and school textbooks well into the civil rights and black liberation movements, and still has not been fully consigned to the dustbin of history where it belongs. In 1915, Wilson screened the first movie ever shown at the White House, The Racist Birth of a Nation, based on a book written by his graduate school roommate, which became recruiting propaganda for the so-called Second Ku Klux Klan, the first movie ever shown in the White House. But that egregious work of art also sparked the growth of the NAACP, who organized against it. The question before us is what will be the impact of Obama's attempt to sanitize and heroicize American actions in Vietnam? Who gets to tell the story that's passed on, and what sort of story will it be? A 2013 Gallup poll is cause for concern. It found that 51% of Americans aged 18 to 29 believe it was not a mistake to send U.S. forces to Vietnam. Only 43% of this group thought U.S. involvement was a mistake. This is the highest level of pro-war sentiment of any age group surveyed since the war ended. By comparison, only 23% of Americans over 65 thought the war was not a mistake. In the entire sample, 34% supported the war, 57% opposed it, which is also the highest level of support for the Vietnam War since 1970. Of course, we might quibble of what is meant by a mistake, but young people seem more and more innocent of an anti-war perspective. History matters, especially what gets passed on as history. Will the grand narrative be that of a post-9/11 world where America is the victim of crazed terrorists from around the world with drones, torture, surveillance, and continuous war as appropriate responses, where the solution to social problems are automatically based on the means and methods of the military or the criminal injustice system, where resources are denied to the needy but freely available to the war makers and the police regime? The fantasy of techno-war, nurtured in the electronic battlefields, 20,000 sensors along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, the computerization of intelligence embodied in the murderous Phoenix program, and even the first primitive drones, they were deflated by defeat in Vietnam, but they seem to live on. These are being revived in new generations of smart drones, a developing triple canopy of surveillance devices to be orbiting the Earth along with cyber warfare. The utter disregard of the environment embodied in the technological onslaught on Vietnam, which led to the development of the concept of ecocide, is today echoed and amplified by human-induced climate change. Today, there are US military bases in over 100 countries throughout the world, and the police covet drones along with the latest military technology and surveillance techniques. The dreams of empire are alive and deadly, but yet under threat. The National Intelligence Council predicts that the economies of Asia will surpass the economies of Europe and North America by 2030. As economic troubles are compounded, will Americans resist the temptation to demonize the rest of the world and rather find ways to join the world on an equal footing? Can something honest and useful to the world and to Americans be garnered from the Vietnam experience? Not patriotic faith, well-nursed resentment, or self-justification blended with narcissistic sentimentality. Poor people are relentlessly and patronizingly lectured to take responsibility for their condition. It would be more productive to call the people in power to account for what they did in Vietnam and for what they manipulate to do in the future. We need to remind people that there was a serious, broad-based, and persistent resistance to the American war against Vietnam. That GIs, as shown in the powerful documentary Sir No Sir, creatively and courageously engaged in active resistance to the war. That ongoing war was not considered a normal or tolerable state. That US power was confronting real human beings who were fully capable of outmaneuvering the best of American strategists and whose suffering needs to be remembered and honored. Learning from the experience of Vietnam allows for the possibility that Americans might learn to live with and not against the rest of the world. President Obama avows that the US, quote, doesn't play for second place. Our task is not so easily reducible to sound bites. How to convince people that the empire has no clothes, that we need a human and not merely a techno fix. In fact, our goal is to actually accelerate the fall from a place of dominance to one that is more humane, while cushioning the inevitable blow to our society and others by rebuilding strong communities and values of solidarity and connecting our efforts with that of others throughout the world. The war should remind us of what Martin Luther King called an inescapable network of mutuality in which the fates of Vietnamese and Americans, among others, are inextricably linked. The choice is clear. We recognize our common humanity or indulge in rituals of power that end in mutual destruction. Unending war is not only a tremendous strain on our economy, it promotes a dangerous delusion of power, as if techno-bullying is a way forward. It is on us, all of us, to not merely speak truth to power, but to grasp the power of truth. We need a counter-commemoration of the American war in Vietnam, in which both the human cost of that conflict and the human capacity to resist oppression are honored and elaborated. Imperial America is stuck in a past that never existed. Our mandate is to find a way forward. A good initial step is an honest accounting of the U.S.'s wrongful war in Vietnam. Our commemoration needs to be a warning. No more Vietnams, no more imperial war. Thank you.